Thank you very much indeed, Mr Wiltshire. I'd like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Inverclyde for securing this debate and indeed introducing it in such a thorough and well-argued way. I think we've definitely benefited from his experience, both ministerially in charge of electoral administration, but also, as was alluded to, his experience being close to the difficulties in the 2007 Scottish elections. I would also actually like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Glasgow South for tabling the early day motion on this issue and indeed encouraging members that it might be a good idea to have an adjournment debate on this topic, and I'm very glad that we have that chance today. And I think the turnout and indeed the oversubscription for speaking in this debate just shows the interest of MPs in all things electoral. I want to focus sort of mainly on the issues of election night, but before I come to that, I just really want to say that I obviously think that returning officers do an absolutely vital job. It's not always a straightforward job, and obviously in some cases they have very difficult decisions and judgment calls to make, and it's right that they should be able to get on with that independently of politicians, but within the framework and the structure that Parliament decides. I think the recent move to additional postal voting in recent years has been actually very helpful for democracy, and I'm sure other members will experience when they're out knocking on doors and they speak to somebody who perhaps is elderly and concerned if there's an election. For example, we had a by-election in December in my constituency. Slightly more treacherous conditions, dark very early, and for a lot of people, actually, the ability to simply apply for a postal vote without a huge form and doctor's letters has actually meant that more people can be enfranchised. But there has been issues of fraud raised as a result of this, and so I also welcome the signatures that are now required. That does obviously bring with it the issue of verification, but in general terms, this does not seem to have been problematic in implementation. I was quite shocked actually by the member for Vale of Clwyd's statistic of 3.5 million people not being on the electoral register, and I think we all should be shocked and horrified by that statistic because being on the register is vital for people to have a voice and be able to be represented properly by being able to decide on who will do that job. I will certainly give way.
I thank the honourable lady for giving way. Would she like to comment on the Liberal Democrat, the ex-Liberal Democratic leader of Islington Council, who wanted to keep even more people off the register?
Oh, well, I was in fact interested to come to the what I think were actually quite damaging allegations that he made about my colleagues in Islington. And I imagine he's referring to the issue back in 2006, and as you will know, in fact, Islington Council does do an annual registration drive in common with other local authorities, and more than 90% of people are registered. I take his point that 92%, for example, is not good enough. We want to aim at 100%, but that obviously is, I think, evidence that that they are certainly working very hard on it. He will be aware that there was an issue around a press release put out by the Labour member for that area that was the subject of a standards investigation and was branded unwise, and the Electoral Commission itself took the matter up, expressing its concern and suggested that the press release used was in fact misleading. So I think I would just urge a little bit of caution before going too much down that route, because that has already been investigated by the Commons authorities and certainly found to not have been the scandal that he seems to be suggesting that it was. On the issue of the general election night and when the count should take place, I think we would all agree that accuracy should be a top priority, but clearly overnight counting for the past decades has not led to massive problems with accuracy. The case used in 2007 about the machines and spoiled ballots has already been discussed. Obviously, these problems with the Scottish elections would have happened on the next day had the count taken place then. I think the other point to bear in mind about the timing of the general election count is that neither of these problems are anywhere near likely to happen with the general election. As regards spoiled ballots, I'm fairly sure that we'll be spared the wording of Alex Salmon for First Minister on the ballot papers. And in terms of counting machines, well, obviously, because the counts will be able to be done by hand under the electoral system used for the general election, then the issue of counting machines simply does not come into play.
I'm very grateful. Very quick. I wonder if she could give me her opinion on if there's a likelihood that the general election will be held on the same days as local election results in local elections in England, as has happened on many occasions recently. if there were a change in the electoral system for Westminster to, for example, the alternative vote, wouldn't there need to be a rule that could never happen again, because you really shouldn't have two elections on the same day run by different systems, which was the conclusion of the Gould report?
I think certainly the experience we've had in Scotland suggests that timing them at different points would be helpful, and indeed one of the things that would make that a lot easier would be fixed-term parliaments. All of our other elections are on a fixed-term basis, and so if we had that for Westminster, then there would be that certainty without this issue raising its head. In terms of what the public out there think about this, I used Twitter and Facebook last night to just actually share an excellent document that the Electoral Commission has put together, which says which authorities or constituencies are counting when, because they've done a study actually. But I also asked people, what they thought, and there was a few people that thought that it was fair enough if the counting didn't take place till the Friday, but some of the comments that people left, and the majority of people that commented were saying that they wanted the count to take place that night, were things like, delay is not good for democracy. Things must be seen to be fair as well as be fair, which I think is very important. Somebody else pointed out the difficulty that people would have attending the count if they're actually political volunteers on the Friday. Not all employers are helpful about time off. And as somebody who worked in the private sector before coming to this place, I can certainly recall having to hoard holiday for elections and the difficulties that political activists have with that. Someone else said it's half the fun seeing it all play out like that. The count is such a buzz. And I really think that we should be bearing in mind some of these comments that people are making. Somebody else said overnight counting is sadly one of the last interesting features of elections. So at least some people out there are really appreciating this. The Honourable Member for Brentwood and Ongar suggested that it was important because it might have an impact on the financial markets, which I think was an interesting point. I'm not sure I agreed 100% with it, but I certainly think it was an interesting point. But he seemed to suggest that the tradition element of a general election night was less important, that it wasn't about that experience. But I'm more inclined to agree with the Honourable Member for Glasgow South on this point. I'll give way.
Mr. Pickles, you misunderstood what I was saying. I'm just what I'm saying, the entertainment value is not as important as the exercise in democracy and the orderly transfer of government.
I do take his point, although what I would say is that actually the entertainment value has an impact on democracy, because I think what it does is it is a way of people engaging and being interested in our democracy, and I think that is actually going to be good for turnout, it's going to be good for political engagement in between elections in terms of people contacting their members of parliament and getting involved in politics, and I think that is a good thing. I'm very sorry, I do only have a very short time left, so I do want to just make a little bit of progress. Election night is watched by millions of people, and these are not just political anoraks. These are people that are interested in current affairs. It often becomes a social gathering, in fact. I know that people will often invite their friends round and get some food in and make an event of it. I know this from the 2005 election, when lots of people that I hadn't heard from in years from university suddenly started texting me saying that they had it on television and congratulations that I'd won. And so I think this is something which it definitely is worth preserving. There is a small set of circumstances where perhaps it's not possible to do, and that might be if you've got to take ballot boxes on ferries or if there's difficult weather conditions in the islands and so on. And I think everybody accepts that if there are extenuating circumstances, then the count cannot take place overnight. But in general terms, I really do believe that it is something which we should stick with, and returning officers should be encouraged to do so. I think the postal vote argument is a total fallacy. As we all know as campaigners, most people fill in their postal votes and send them in as soon as the postal votes go out. That's why we know when the votes go out is a really important time in the campaign. And it's a tiny percentage that actually come in on polling day itself. That can easily be dealt with without it taking 2 to 3 hours. So I'll be interested to hear the Minister's comments on how we may be able to encourage returning officers for the sake of interest in our democracy, in terms of being seen that it's fair, and the security concerns raised earlier, that the election can continue to take place, the counting on the polling night itself.